Lecture 3. Today's topic is going to be video games. How bad could that be? How amazing can it be to come to Cal and have a course on beauty and joy of computing and not talk about video games as what a lot of people do with their spare time? So I always try to, again, have a technology in the news segment. So the technology in the news is that business is catching on to some of the gamer addiction that folks like yourself and folks like me have exhibited in their behavior. So what I mean about that is people like Nike have figured out a way to make exercise fun, like a game, right? The Nike Plus system allows you to connect with your iPod, and if you happen to beat your best score, it plays a special Lance Armstrong dun-dun-dun-dun triumph, and you keep trying to beat that score and get more badges and whatever that is. Some other companies, so Mint.com tries to encourage investing and try to encourage money making and try to encourage frugal management of your finances. And if you kind of there's a competition, and if you beat your neighbor or kind of the top 10%, you get some awards and some badges and some cool stuff there. And Foursquare is a cool, what they call location-based social network that encourages you to, let's say, you get a badge for, or maybe a badge meaning a discount, if you visit a couple different stores in the same block within 1 week or something. So it's trying to get you to go out into the world and buy things and frequent stores and kind of see new things. And if you do that, you get some rewards. Kind of cool. So it's kind of trying to get to that gamer addiction of getting points, badges, rankings to try to connect with that. So it's kind of neat. And it's just recently on CNN. It's kind of cool. All right. So meta question. Clickers ready? Clickers at the ready. Here we go. How big is the U.S. video game market? Okay, in 2009. This is a 2009 number, not the last 10 years. How big is this market? Just give me a sense. A lot of zeros, by the way. Starts from 100 million up to 100 million, all the way up to a billion, and then down to a trillion by the time you get to E. All right. So let's see how we get. We got 43. We had 50 last time. Let's see if we can get up to 60 clickers, because in theory we have about 80 some students in the class. So in theory that number should get to in the 80s at some point. All right. Oh, we're doing better. 60s. We're cresting 60s. All right. And this isn't so much of a click and then talk to your neighbor. It's more kind of a sample of what you think it is. So let me see a display here. I'll say stop here. Let's do our display. And here's what we've got. Okay, what you all said. Wow, you're all doing well. The right answer, do I have an option? The right answer is it's a $10 billion market. That's incredible. So, but some of you were thinking like it's a trillion. I mean, this is like national debt level kind of thing. We're not there. It's not that big. Although that would be cool if it were, because then you could somehow just funnel that to the right people, and we could somehow come out of a debt. But anyway, long story short, it's a huge market, folks. It's really amazing, and it funds a ton of industry. I mean, this industry funds a ton of people working really hard, creative professionals. In fact, it funds someone like you if you wanted to follow that realm and go into the video game industry. It'd actually be, it's a wonderful opportunity for people who have artistic talent and technical talent who think games are fun. That industry, 10 billion, will fuel your career. So, overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go through some of the history of games, a quick review of where we are. Many of you, we always have to kind of look back so that you can kind of honor those who have come before us to build, the people who have built the pyramids that you stand on and the people behind you are going to stand on. So let's look at some of the adventures and what the history of games are. Kind of do some how. We've done a little bit of that last week in terms of the 3D graphics part. I'll just touch on one slide again, but we'll do some motion capture and description of AI. Then I'll talk about the good and bad and the ugly. And if you saw the front slide, I have a co-instructor, Glenn, who actually has worked in the video game industry, and he's going to share some of his experiences. So it's kind of cool to kind of ground this discussion, not just in the academic world. And also talk about the future. So if you are interested in video games, it's really quite neat. There's a ton of ways you can learn about them, the history of these, and they're almost all very well produced. I do recommend Play Value. This is one of the podcasts you can download from them, that site, or the Apple iTunes store, and it's really very entertaining, little 10-minute snippets, and they kind of categorize them in different topics. So it's really, really useful. Great place to start if you're looking about, and this is what informed a lot of the slides that I created today. So the first big game was called Space War. Isn't that cool? Space War. So this is the first to gain recognition. I'll turn my phone off. Maybe I'm getting some feedback from some of this stuff. So 61, the first game, 1961. Let me hand my phone to somebody else. Maybe that'll help a little bit. Oh, by the way, new phone number, by the way. Make sure to write that down. I have a special cell phone for just university business, but just students. One of the questions people have asked in the past was, Dan, how do I get in touch with you when you're not on campus working from home? Bam, there's my number. If you have an Apple iPhone, you can do FaceTime, and I can see your face. It's really cool. So write that number down and cross out the old one. It's really cool. I do encourage people to call me if you have questions. I love it. I'll turn it off, off hours and stuff, but when I'm with the family. But I'll have it on as much as I can to try to respond to your questions. Email is always best, but if you have an urgent question like, Dan, I'm in lab, we can't get to something, come talk to me. I'd be happy to talk to you. Okay. So this is an amazingly fun game. In fact, it inspired a couple of the Atari games. Atari is one of the cartridge-based games you'll see I'll talk about later. And that's one of my favorite games, the Space War on the Atari. It was wonderful. Unfortunately, there's no network in this room, and the wire isn't working today, so I'll show you a little demo of it. But what happens is when you start this is a central star, which has gravity. So both of those ships start to fall towards the star, and you can rotate them very much like asteroids and shoot. So there's nothing more than that, but it's kind of a fun little game, and there's an actual Java version. So this is really quite neat, and one of the first games. We need to honor the folks who built the first game, and that was officially the first game. By the way, it inspired quite a few other games. I mentioned that before. It was also widely ported, because back in the old days, you had big mainframe machines and screens that were basically vector or very, very early raster displays. So it was a game that kind of got shared around through the underground kind of early internet to other folks, and it was very exciting. So we need to honor the founding fathers of video games, and for the most part, these are pretty well acknowledged as Ralph Baer and Nolan Bushnell. Ralph Baer came out with the Odyssey cartridge system, and I believe he won the Congressional Medal of Honor. Here he is receiving it from President Bush. Nolan Bushnell was the founder of Atari, one of the most successful and at the time fastest growing companies in history, actually. And eventually sold it off, and the name Atari ended up being bought by other folks, and now there's still the name Atari, but it has nothing connected with the video games anymore. But so both should be known to you. Play Value has a really wonderful little video. It's called The Founding Fathers you should watch, and it's a useful reference on those two folks. Talking about artists, these are people kind of the businessmen. But if you want to talk about video games, you need to talk about all pieces of it. There's the business side, and there's also the artistic and creative side, as well as the engineering side of building some of the cool hardware that was very cutting edge at the time. This is one of the most creative, talented people in the history of video games. Shigeru Miyamoto. He was the founding father of all of these characters you see in that photograph. So Donkey Kong, Super Mario Brothers, Zelda, Super Mario 64. He was one of the architects and early people who worked with Nintendo for the DS and the Wii. He has fundamentally changed the world of video games. If it weren't for him, we would be perhaps still in very, very, I would say maybe 2D world. We wouldn't have the creative storylines we have now. Certainly, Donkey Kong, Super Mario Brothers are some of the early games that really broke through the genre at the time. So they were kind of genre-defining games. Really great stuff. So he's also the first person ever elected to the Video Game Hall of Fame, which is well worth that honor, well-deserved honor. Chief Game Designer, Nintendo. So let's go to the history of video games. We're now in the 70s, so let's go back in time. Back in the 70s, none of you were born yet. Brian and I remember with fond passion back in the 70s when there were big cars and gas shortages and hostage. Okay, no. So the early video games, you had the golden age of the arcades, and that certainly has to be heralded as the time that society knew about video games. These arcades were everywhere. You'd go to a pizza shop, and there'd be a stand-up arcade console. So this is a picture of what it used to look like in the older days. And I can't tell you how many quarters. I mean, how much, if you kind of do a ratio of how much of my personal income went into this, it was almost 100%. Of every quarter I got, if you kind of averaged all my allowances into quarters, almost everything went into this quarter machine. I mean, not this one, but in general, all the quarter machine. It's quite addictive, and it says a lot about what the thirst for this kind of entertainment was at the time. Because here's a kid who was 11, 12 years old playing every single dime, not into food or candy, but to video games. It's really amazing. Then the early console came around. That's called the first. You're going to see many generations of these consoles. The first generation was the Magnavox Odyssey. Again, that's the Ralph Baer creation. Then you had, at the same time, so again, at the same time in the 70s, all these things were happening at once. You had mainframe computers, so you didn't have personal computers. That hit in the 80s. So you had mainframe computers with teletypes and maybe a very small screen. People playing very simple games like Hunt the Wumpus and Rogue, which was a very popular text-based game. You had the beginnings of some home computers. Sorry? Is that right? Oh, Rogue is from Berkeley. I actually didn't know that. Didn't catch that on that. That's wonderful. Good stuff. A lot of things. You'll see, by the way, in your 4 years that a tremendous number of things that influenced society came from Berkeley. Operating systems to databases to this wonderful game back in the day. Early home computers, this is before the real PC revolution in the 80s, but early home computers had, you type, this is actually what they would do. You'd have a video game magazine which would have the program printed out, and you would go and retype the program in to play it. How about that for dedication? And if you got something wrong, you're like, was it printed wrong? And sometimes it was printed wrong. And like, there's a whole thousands of people be typing the same wrong program in and not getting it to work. So they better make sure that they type checked it. They used to pass things around in floppies and tape drives. I mean, it's amazing that we had computing back then, and people really worked hard to get the games, but you had games of Zork and some other games. The next round was, still in the 70s, was the second generation of consoles, and that was the Atari, the Intellivision, ColecoVision, and Activision as a software company trying to support all of that. And that was the really big, when Atari hit, it hit everywhere. It was really great. It was the big thing to buy at Christmas time. It was the thing to buy, so it was in the American consciousness. The Magnavox didn't sell so well, but when Atari hit, every kid needed to have the Atari. Every kid my age had an Atari. In the 80s, so now the 80s come around. Again, you're not born yet, probably, right? Not born, right, not born. Born, maybe, yeah, okay, just barely. Barely, okay. One, all right. Genre innovation says that people didn't just have the same kind of games. They thought about, oh, there's a whole new genre of games, and there's a whole games of kind of the two-person fighter games and the adventure-y games. So this genre innovation kind of exploded in terms of the software side of it. On the hardware, you had early computers, early PCs, the Apple II, the Atari. Again, the online you had beginning of online gaming. People used to play some of the MUD games, mostly text, by the way, for this. Multi-user Dungeon, is that right? Yeah. I never played them, so this is a little side of that. They had handheld LCD games. So that was a big deal. So the beginning kind of casual gaming where you'd be in meetings or be in the BART, say. BART was around in the 70s, right? And then you'd have people playing text-based, black and white handheld games for the first time ever. And it was really cool that you could bring a game around with you and kind of while away the time at the DMV playing a game. It's kind of neat. Then there was a crash. So just as fast as the rise was, there was a crash. There was just too many, it's all things coming together of people realizing lots of money there and a lot of basically crappy software coming in, crappy cartridges coming in, and then the public couldn't figure out what was good and what was bad, and then it wasn't enough to sustain the whole industry, and the whole thing crashed. Everything crashed. It was amazing to watch this huge rise and this huge crash, culminating with Atari releasing one of the worst pieces of software ever, the worst games ever, called E.T., and I actually own a cartridge of E.T. I still have it. Terrible game. I mean, you just run around and you pick up dots. There's no point. It's cool sounds. They basically, the E.T. movie came out, and within like 2 months they said, we have to have a game because the movie's out, and it's so popular, you have to like capitalize. You'll notice there's a lot of that merchandising capitalization on a big new thing, right? When Avatar came out, we got to have an Avatar cups and Avatar water coolers, right? You have the same kind of thing. You have to, but now they set it up in advance, but they didn't realize that E.T. was going to be such a hit. All of a sudden it was. They said, quick, make a video game. Well, it takes a year or 2 years to make a good game. No, a month. So they made this terrible game. And nobody bought it, right? People like me bought it, but nobody basically didn't sell. And they ended up burying them in a dump. There's a video of them just pushing millions of cartridges into a dump and just burying it with dirt. Just, symbolizing, kind of the end of an age. Really sad, but anyway, appropriate for how bad E.T. was. Then came the real big thing. You thought Atari was big in terms of the thing to buy for your kid at Christmas. When Nintendo came out, the NES, that's the picture. When that came out, nothing touched Nintendo. Nothing touched Nintendo in terms of the kind of infusion into the American society of how many kids, percentage of kids that were a video game age that had this thing. Every kid had an NES, and if you didn't, you knew people on your block that had them, and then you visited their house. They became your best friend. Hey, good buddy, we were friends, right? Hey, NES time. Okay, hook them up. The gamepad also came out at that time. So now we're in the 90s, and now you're starting to be born. Right now, there's a little bit of happening with your parents, and you guys are starting to come around. Arcades declining. So the arcades were still around here and there, but really kind of gone. So meaning companies who had explicit arcades where you'd walk in and there'd just be arcades, be in malls, was kind of declining because you were getting the same experience at home. Some of these consoles, the NES and others, were giving you exactly the same experience in the arcades, and so why would you go pay money when you could just play the game over and over and over at home? Handhelds came of age. You ended up having some of the Game Boy, some other ones. Some color came into that. Mobile phone gaming just started. What's so hot now, that was just the beginning of that. The fourth generation consoles, so you had the Super Genesis, you had the Super NES. So basically people are kind of looking at what worked and try to kind of repeat that. The fifth generation consoles came in the late part of the 90s. That was the beginning of the PlayStation. Sony said, we got to get into this market. Bam, there's the first PlayStation. That was a big hit. The N64. Super Mario 64 was a big software hit. That was huge. Then you had the transition to 3D, where you now had fast enough processors that just like a week ago, you said, hey, why don't we do this in 3D? And now all of a sudden, now you're flying in 3D with these cars and with the ships. And it's amazing the immersive experience you were able to get at home. So that was just great. And Tomb Raider was a big software success. Now we're in 2000, so now we're in the decade that you recognize. These are all the things that you probably know better than I do, so I'd ask you all to come up and give the lecture and I'll sit down. You had iPhone games, and in fact, Apple has released, at some point there was a snapshot in time, they said, games are half of the apps that we sell. So what people do with their phones is they buy apps, and half of the apps, they're not productivity, they're not what time is the BART arrive, it's half of them are games. Pretty incredible. You have now 6th generation consoles, again, since 2001, and this is the next generation of this. So PS2, Microsoft's Xbox, the GameCube. You now have the return to, as I don't read the slides, but you have alternate controllers becoming an influence. So you have now guitars as an input. It's not just a stick, it's not just a driving controller, which maybe a swivel pad, but you now have interesting alternative controllers, and that begins to become the reason people buy systems. So that's kind of cool. So you have DDR as a pad where you dance, and it plugs into your PlayStation, and you can jump around and do a little dancing game, and it's really crazy fun, and that's a very different controller than the standard joystick or mouse or driving controller. Online gaming is huge, and this is what you know more than I do. Online game becomes a big dominant factor in why people spend time, why people play games, why people choose a particular game, because it's a great online experience, and World of Warcraft and Ultima Online become very, very popular. You also have the rise, again, of these casual games, the kind of cell phone, little small things in which you get into a game, you play a little bit, and you stop, and maybe you suspend it, and you come back next time, but it's not like a long journey, and these casual games are easier. We'll talk a little bit about that at a slide or two, but these casual games are really very accessible to just anybody who wants to have while away 5 minutes. You can really get into a game and have a good time with these casual games. So now we're at the last little stage here. Now in the last 5 years, what's happened now? 7th generation consoles have come out, so you have top portables, including the phones that now have a great gaming experience with tilt sensors and gyroscopes and all that in terms of integrating that into games and making that available to developers. The consoles have gone full bore. These consoles are as fast or faster than home computers. So these little teeny console uses 400 watts, which is a lot of power. Think about, a light bulb is about 100 watts. This is 4 light bulbs just sitting there humming away, doing nothing but putting polygons in a screen so you can go shoot and drive and do other things. So really, really high intensity machines. Development budgets start to skyrocket in terms of realizing that we're going to pay $50 for a game, we better have great content. That great content better have film-like work. And we talked a little bit about that last week, where we had games being able to look and feel like a film. You have a tremendous budget to support all that content creation. Motion control revolutionizes everything. From the iPhone with the tilt sensors to the Wii with the joystick that you can use for a tennis racket or a golf club or anything, revolutionizes gameplay. So it's not so much about the software or the hardware. It's about, it is hardware in that sense, but it's about the controller, not about how fast, how many polygons a second, or how good the software is. You can have some bad games, but amazing controllers and some good gameplay, and actually that can dominate. So the Wii has become a very, very popular piece of hardware. As an example of how amazing this hardware is, let's take a look at the PS3. We know, by the way, one of the things that's a lesson learned over all of this is that good software determines success. You could have the world's fastest piece of hardware that could be free. I could hand you all this chip, which could be the most amazing video game thing ever, but if there's no software for it, who wants to play it, right? Why would you even have it? Not even worth carrying around in your backpack or your purse. So software is the key thing. So PlayStation 3 is still fighting that war. They're trying to get in, and they're trying to get their share of the game dollar, but their software, the games that have come out for it, maybe in comparison, contrasting with, say, Xbox 3 and the Wii, it's still not the case that the world is flocking to the PlayStation 3, even though it might have the best hardware of all the current 7th generation systems. So here's the details of it, and maybe some of these details are kind of more technical than you need, but it has what we think of as these different cores, maybe like a little processing unit, just as a little thing that can do some calculations. Just think about it that way. And it has 9 of these things, 9 little independent processing units. You're going to hear the word cores later when we talk about the concurrency lecture, but for now, a core is a processing unit. Just does some work, just calculates some stuff and returns some values. It has one, which is the supervisor. It's kind of cool. One supervisor supervises the remaining 8, so that they're not all homogeneous. They're not all the same. You have one centralized supervisor core and not 8 synergistic processors called 8 kind of worker units. So it's kind of neat that they've done this in a heterogeneous way. Here's the interesting thing is, it's so hard to make in one chip, right, in one die. It's called a die when this comes out of the manufacturing of the fab plant. It's so hard to make 9 cores all working without defects, without something wrong. A dust fell on this. It's almost like the dust from Horton Hears a Who. The dust speck falls on this thing in the processing, and you've now lost a whole core. The core doesn't work because when it tries to store it, it wants to store 1, it always stores a 0, and you've lost it. So it's really hard to make something free of defects. Okay? So they actually built into the system redundancy. They say, you know what? During testing, everything undergoes testing. They test all of the cores, and even if all 8 of them are good, they shut one down. And by saying, we're going to build these 8 helper cores, but I only have to actually have defect-free 7 of them. And whichever one fails the testing, that's the one I shut down. And that's built into the system. That's built into the way they deliver the system. So it's fascinating that you can have one that has 8 working, but they have to shut one down anyway because that's the way. It's a simpler model just to shut a working one down than it is to kind of make a special case for the case that had all 8 working. Isn't that weird? Neat, right? Okay. That's the kind of hardware geek in me coming out. So let's talk about the software now. Casual video games are a really, really big deal nowadays. So again, they can be done by one person. They don't have to take a team. They're usually typically not networked. In terms of development and design, I'm talking now about, this is now discussing how you build this. If you were to say, hey, let's go make a company and release a casual video game, this is what it would take, roughly. You can do this in small teams. You can do this in a team of 1, 2, 3, less than 10 typically for these small casual video games. It's kind of cool. This has encouraged a ton of development. This has, in some sense, fueled the tech sector. For small companies, small like, 1, 2, 5, 10, maybe 15-person companies making small little video games. So casual video games that you get for your phone. It's really quite interesting and quite exciting that there's now such an industry for this world. Again, phones are a great platform for that because they already have connectivity for the internet probably. They may have motion control. They have a nice bright screen, and you have it with you all the time, so you don't need a separate controller. So actually, it's a big win to have these phone games. And the time to completion, if you have all the things ready from design to full, maybe first beta rollout, is a couple months. You can actually get a pretty reasonable first draft on a game if you have a good idea in a couple months. To get it really good probably takes about a year or 6 months to a year, I would say. But you can actually have a first draft out there in the hands of people in a couple months. It's really exciting. And in fact, we have a course here on campus that'll teach you how to do Macintosh software development, especially for the iPad and the iPhones and the iPad touches. So if you're interested in that, it's a great course. If you kind of follow up with this computing world, take 61A, maybe take 1 or 2 courses after that, then you'd be ready for this course in Macintosh programming. It's pretty cool. Contrasting the casual video game design with what we call core video game design. And this is kind of where the industry was going when it started to get bigger and bigger budgets. So I actually have a close friend who is the lead, the top person of hundreds of people for the SOCOM franchise. A good friend of mine. Our kids play together. And he gave me the inside scoop on how that works to put together that big thing. So this is a PlayStation 3 game. It's huge. It's really, really big in terms of how long it takes to put a game out, how many people he has working for him, all the asset creation, big, big enterprise. He's the main lead game designer, right? It's his idea, and his job is to manage a huge team of people. These people, he was working here in Bay Area, You know where his team was? Canada. So he's managing a team of 100 people in Canada. That's how it works. That's how teleconferencing and through the likes of lots of frequent flyer mileage, he was managing a huge, massive team, people developing that game in Canada. And he had tons of people working with this. Producers, programmers, tons and tons of people working together, more than 100 people on his team. Pretty incredible. And I said, can you tell me your budget roughly? Don't tell me the real numbers, but tell me roughly what we're talking about. He says, well, we're talking like $10 to $20 million to put this game together. That's an incredible budget, with the hope that it makes 30 or more. I mean, you hope at least to break even, but the hope is you're making at least 30 for each time you do it, so you're making kind of 10 million for this franchise. Pretty incredible, the numbers they're talking about, right? So here's the cool thing about games. So the fun thing is, we actually had a meeting with Lucasfilm, and they see the connection, right? The merchandising connection, where you see Avatar, and then quickly you go outside and you buy a cup that has Avatar because you think that's a cool movie. They see a connection with games where they want to tie the assets together. They're the people working for Industrial Light and Magic, with all this is within the Lucasfilm umbrella, putting together the special effects for the new cool movie. And they can use the same effects in their games. And their goal is to have the game hardware not have to start again. Well, here was the movie, and now you're done. Now do the game design, but try to recreate the tentacles on the Pirates of the Caribbean, blah, blah, blah. No. Literally take the same assets, the same digital data, and move it over to the game. Maybe run a simplification process, because you probably have 1 million polygons for each tentacle here for the film, because of the high quality you have to get, but maybe you have 100,000. So you do some sub-sampling or something to kind of simplify the model. But anyway, the point is, they want to tie it together so there's no kind of redoing the tentacles again. Use the same data both places. So they're very excited about that kind of collection. So, now we talked about this. By the way, this SOCOM game, I'm a pacifist. I just need to know that and to let you know this. So I'm someone who would never buy this game. I would walk away from this game immediately, because it's about shooting people and some armies, and you're simulating being in the thick of things with the hunt and the war zone. But, and this is a big part of the games, right? The games have a reasonable part of these, and thankfully they label them now, self-rated, M for mature, that kind of thing. Here we go. What percentage of parents do you think say that games are a good thing for kids? Overall, taken holistically, games are a positive thing for kids. Here we go. Video games. Yeah, video games, I'm sorry. We're all talking video games, yes. I didn't have room on the title for that. Okay, so video games, positive for kids. Again, this is more kind of a sample than a discussion-y thing, but let's just get some feedback from you guys. What do you guys think? And just for fun, I'll let you see it. Bam. Okay. All right. 60 people have chimed in. Don't change your vote if you can, just kind of not that you're seeing it. And do I have a way to click on the right answer? The right answer is D. 64% of the parents surveyed by the ESA say that games are a positive experience for their kids, video games. Incredible, right? So maybe the parents are exposing their particular kids to the good kind of games, maybe, or active in the room when they're doing it, but it's quite impressive, that number. So everything kind of seems to be rolling on the positive side. You've also, by the way, done some reading this week about the connection between violence and video games, and that'll be pursued in discussion. So kind of keep those thoughts about that connection with you when we come to discussion. So I talked a little bit about how before. Let me see how we're doing for time. So this is all from a week ago, but this slide kind of summarizes it. You have to do all of the things you did in the film, but at 30 frames a second rather than hours per frame. And the amazing things that game creators can do. And I had a friend who worked on this particular game. So I've got some graduates and some other friends who are in the industry, and it's kind of neat to talk to them about how they do their stuff and bring that back to you so that you kind of get a little taste of what it's like in the real world. This is a game called Fight Night 4, I believe. It's really big, and you get to pretend like you're Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali, and you recreate the rumble in the jungle or whatever the classic fights are. Look at that picture. That photograph, that screenshot has glistening light. He's got sweat here. This punch has thrown a bit of sweat in the air. All of this is happening at real-time rates, which is 30 frames a second. Okay? But the fact is, this looks outstanding. This little shine on his face looks amazing. And that's the kind of thing that typically takes minutes or hours to render. But he's doing it, his team made that happen in 30 frames a second rate. That's incredible. So there's a lot of what we call hacks. There's a lot of things that look good, may not be technically the right way the light bounces around realistically, as in a global illumination model. Remember we talked about that last week, global illumination, tries to simulate exactly what happens in the real world. you might not be doing this, but these hacks are able to get those frame rates. So it's quite impressive. The level of things that they've added they also, by the way, thankfully have hardware that is now much faster than it was 10 years ago. So the hardware helps a lot, but the reality is they're getting things that really shouldn't be able to get the kind of quality of these pictures that they are. And it's quite impressive that they're doing that. So that's incredible. Whenever you have high reflective things, this is called a specular reflection. And to get that is actually, to get it really done well is a hard thing, because it might bounce around a couple places, and that's actually hard to follow those rays. So lots of research in that. It's impressive where they've come. Motion capture, I talked a little bit about last week as well, and this is the how. Berkeley has been key in a couple of research results. Berkeley has gotten funding, and we have folks, James O'Brien and team, Jonathan Shuchuk, Manish Agarwala, Carlos Secan, are all professors here in the computer graphics group that I worked with, who have done some outstanding breakthrough work with looking into motion libraries and stitching it and labeling it. It's pretty impressive. So I'm going to show you a quickie video from one of their recent research results about having non-sliding feet and how to do motion blending. So what typically happens is in a motion capture company, they'll have a football player, in this case, do a run. So they'll suit them up, as I showed you last time, suit them up with all the lights on the edge, and they say, go, just run 15 yards. And they'll run, and they'll capture it all. So they have that motion. And they'll say, okay, now run and make a left turn. Run, make a left turn. And now run, make a right turn. Okay, and now, here's the problem. If I want you to run, if I can only do simple stitching, then I want you to run, and rather than run 5 feet and make a right turn, run 10 feet and make a right turn. But you had me run 15 feet, so I don't really have the right thing. Or what if my right turn is kind of a soft right or a harder right than a perfect 90-degree right turn? How do you do that? That wasn't captured. How do you kind of get intermediate animation? How do you get something to do motions, like, I want the creature to follow me, and I'm making it do things that were not in the motion capture library. How does it kind of walk the middle line? And this is that video. So let me just show you this video. It's really very cool.
We present a framework that allows interactive synthesis of motions by cutting and pasting existing motions. This allows extensive reuse of motion capture data. This is a real-time screen capture from a conventional PC. The framework iteratively improves random seed motions. Since the display is updated when a better motion is found, the figure may jump on the screen. We can stop the search and look at the best motion found so far. The motions can be made to satisfy a variety of constraints. Here we demonstrate constraining the position and orientation at the beginning and at the end of the motion. Here we apply 3 constraints, each of which has its own timestamp.
A constraint means that you have to be at a certain place at a certain time. It just means that that creature, that motion has to go through that position. So there's a position there at the middle red arrow that it has to go through at that time. And it figures out how to get there smoothly.
We can also constrain individual joints. Here we constrain the head to be high at a particular position and at a particular time. This constraint creates a jumping motion at the desired time. We can force him to keep his head down by dragging the constraint low.
Watch how it pulls from a different library now. Automatically, it has to pull from a library that has his head as low as possible. So it's not saying be in this position this time, but just saying some overall constraint that say, take your head as low as possible. Find me the motion that does that. And right there is the lowest his head ever gets when he kind of dips around making that turn. Automatically. It's really cool.
The framework can be used for any kind of motion. Here we demonstrate it on ice hockey motions.
Electronic Arts is the funder of this work because they have tons of real great games that have great motion libraries associated with them.
iterative improvement provides a payoff between the quality of motion and search speed. For the same set of constraints, motion after 3 seconds of search is not very good, and the feet slide on the ground. As we wait longer, the motion gets better. After 12 seconds, the motion is very good. We can constrain the pose of the body. Here we constrain the character to be lying flat on the ground at a desired position and orientation and time.
And this may have gone through several different mini libraries to find that final animation. It's pretty incredible. Dynamically changing which library it pulls from to make it happen.
Hard constraints can be used to synthesize interactions between figures. The interactions occur at the constraints, and an interpolating motion is synthesized. The stationary white figures represent the hard constraints, and the color of the skeleton changes when we cut between motions.
That was remarkably seamless to having been drawn from several different libraries all stitched together. Pretty impressive. All right. Lights back on. Whoop. Don't do that. Yeah, sliding fee. Okay, let me open the door. Boy, is it hot in here, guys. Question? Yeah. The question was, does EA not have to do any more motion capture? Well, every year you have to have, EA tries to build the libraries. Once you have a really vast library, in theory, you just draw from that. And, you know, you might have all the runners look like the same guy you sampled. So maybe one of the things that they're doing is adding different styles of running. You know, some people run high up, lower down, and that'll just add to that library. But this certainly helps them fill in the gaps between having an incomplete library. That's true. But they still do the work for that. So, AI. So artificial intelligence is used to control where things go. You have kind of low AI and high AI. So low AI, low intelligence level might be a very simple heuristic. You know, just don't run into walls and look for food and look to pound on the other guy. Or a high level heuristic which actually learns from what the player does and adapts to it. That's really neat. When you have this in games like driving games, it makes for a much more enjoyable playing experience when the AI learns from you. And we'll talk a little bit more about AI in a full lecture later on in the semester, but that's pretty exciting. Can you try to get that door open? Because it's a little pretty hot in here. Thanks. The interesting thing is you also have dynamic difficulty. And dynamic difficulty is where the AI tries to actually adjust itself to your ability. And that's the key thing. You want to have this thing called a groove, the gamer's groove, where the game gets harder sorry. Hopefully it'll get cooler as the semester goes on. Dynamic difficulty says that the game adapts to your work and actually tries to make it easy when you first get there and then make it really hard as you get to be a better expert. It's kind of a neat thing. And they also have something called cheating AI. So if you're beating the AI by a certain amount, it will cheat and all of a sudden catch up to you. Like go 200 miles an hour where the car can never go 200 miles an hour, but just all of a sudden, hey, it's behind me. I was lapping it, and now it just caught up to me to kind of keep me honest in a way if I'm squashing it by a lot. So I want to kind of give Glenn a chance to maybe spend a couple minutes, maybe not more than 5, talking about his experience. He was a game professional for roughly 10 years or so. Started his own company, and Glenn, come on up and tell us what you have. And I have like 4 microphones for you. So you stand here, and I'll just hold this for you so you can tell about this. Don't get the wireless here.
Hi, I'm Glenn Sutton, and I worked in a really interesting time frame in a game development company because it was after the garage, we called them garage games, where a couple people would get together and spend, a month sitting in the basement and drawing all the characters and drawing them on the screen, and then, building very simple games, to starting to move towards the more hardcore games that took a lot more processing power. Back when I was working on games, there was no graphics, there were no 3D graphics cards, and you may have seen that when you tore apart the computers in your last discussion. You saw that there was a card that specifically was designed just to do 3D graphics. We didn't have that. Everything had to be done on the CPU, on the central processing unit, and that includes not only doing the drawing, but also the sound, the artificial intelligence, the game constraints. Everything all had to be done on the CPU. So we had to spend a lot of time. A lot of our time was spent optimizing our code and our graphics and our sound to get it to work well on hardware machines. What was interesting also at that time was that games really drove the hardware industry to make faster and faster computers. There's definitely some applications, in the supercomputer applications that are kind of relegated to universities or large labs and large research labs. But for personal computers, largely what drove the need to create the graphics cards and these multiple processors were games, because games were selling so much more. So there was a huge market share of games compared to other software, and games required a lot of CPU time and a lot of speed. So I worked on some simpler games to begin with. They had to fit on the floppy, so that we had to compress them. It took, we had teams of like 10 or 12 people tops. There was a producer, a couple people that worked on the code, a couple people that worked on as artists, and a couple people that worked on sound. And then if we were lucky, we had a level designer that worked on just the game and the game concepts. And our budgets were about $100,000 was a huge budget. That was towards the end of my game development career at Presage Software. $100,000 was an enormous amount of money to have to spend. And that was typically a 12 to 15 month cycle, because we had 10 or 12 people, and we had to spend so much of our time had to be spent optimizing and compressing and finding those hacks, like Dan was saying. A good example of one of those hacks, if you've ever played Doom or any of the offsets of Doom, the first Doom game was all done on the CPU. It wasn't done on the graphics processing unit. So they had to cheat. And the way they cheated was they built the levels, they lit the levels with a bunch of lighting, and then they rendered them all offline, and then they saved all of the pictures that they put on the walls. They saved those into separate files. So they cheated. They didn't light things in real time. They already had them pre-lit. And that's an example of one of some of the hacks that we had to do to get these things running fast and running correctly. Nowadays, if you look at the credits of a game, a modern game nowadays, there's two divergent camps now. There's the casual games like Dan was talking about, where you can still go back and a couple of people can work on it, or there's this huge expectation coming from the public to have unbelievably rich experiences and unbelievable graphics and sound and rich media. And that, if you look at the credits, it's as long as a movie now, because that's how many people it takes. And so when I started my own company, I started my own game development company. It was an offshoot of some of the people, brought some of the people from Presage Software, some of the best of the best, brought some people from Blizzard, World of Warcraft fame, brought them in. We had an awesome technical team. We sat down, we designed games, we built prototypes of those games, and then we'd have to do what we call pitching. And so we'd have to go to the big publishers, EA, LucasArts, Interplay, Atari back in the day. We had to present them with our budget, our full budget, present them with the prototype, give them a walkthrough of the game, and then they might pick it up and they might fund us for the development. So it was a big process. Unfortunately, the business side is an incredibly integral, important part of starting a business. We didn't have a very strong business side, so that's when we decided to close up 2 years later. But we did create 2 prototypes that were incredible, that from anybody that's seen them. And that, if I would give you one piece of advice, if you have any idea of or any inkling to go into game development, and it's a really cool aspect of computing. It's very tough. The crunch times, when you get to the times where you're supposed to deliver milestones and you're supposed to deliver the final product. Yeah, you would pull triple all-nighters to get because advertising was all relying on it. Christmas sales was huge, and that was an incredibly important part of a company's sales. So it was very rewarding. It was very challenging. It can burn you out very quickly, but it's incredibly cool, and it's incredibly fun. You can be a rock star in these, and you see, if you go to E3 or any of the other conferences, you can go and meet some of these guys, and these guys are incredible, and they are revered as rock stars in the game development world. If I was going to give you one piece of advice, though, if you want to go into any aspect of game development, if you want to be an artist, if you want to develop the code, if you want to do the work on the sound, start coming up with an idea, because that's the easy part. Everybody's got an idea. You could ask everybody in this room, and they have 1 or 2 or 3 different ideas for what would be a cool game. Prototype it. Come up with some art. Get some friends that are good artists. Draw some rough sketches and scan them. Find some sounds online. Prototype it so that you've got something that you can bring to an employer. That's actually that'll put you head and shoulders above people that just hand in resumes.
Great. Hey, let's give Glenn a hand for that. That was really great. Huh? Awesome. There are some other slides that I had that you can just read yourself. I summarized basically the reading you had. So you had a reading about games with a purpose and good games and some of the addiction and some of the carpal tunnel stuff. You can just read those slides. Those will be fine, all right? We'll see you on Monday again next, and you have lab today and discussion about games this week, one of which is going to be led